On the left, Dylan Donegan, 8-2 Sultai mid-range, and we have Austin Collins on the right side, 8-2 Teamer Climb.
So originally when we were talking about the various high droid Crassus decks of the format, we were looking at Sultai, and it was like, oh, you're basically double splashing for Ravenous Chupacabra and Vraska's Contempt. Maybe these black cards aren't worth it, but I saw Austin Collins last round fighting against Alex Hahn, and the black cards looked very much worth it in the actual mirror match.
Yeah, we're gonna see here. We see Austin leading off with an Incubation Druid. Dylan, on the other hand, is going Merfolk Branchwalker to start. Dylan has another play, or excuse me, Austin has another play here on turn 3. It's going to be a Wild Growth Walker. And looks like untapped Steam Vents along with the Incubation Druid is going to bring Merfolk Branchwalker to the party, gaining 3 life, putting a counter on that Wild Growth Walker. Austin reveals a Breeding Pool, going to add that to his hand, passes the turn over to Donegan.
We were talking about whether or not the mana acceleration creatures are actually something that give you a leg up in these matchups, and you would think that building up to Hydroid Crassus that they would be huge, and you see Austin leveraging his mana creature very well to get onto the board a little bit early.
Yeah, I think Austin is looking generally to control the early turns of this game. That's going to be really important with his deck. He comes out a little faster. He's got Steel Leaf Champion in the deck, not a card we're really seeing a lot of here in SCG Indianapolis, but Austin's looking to get on board quickly, and if he can find some early pressure, he's certainly stronger in the early game than Dylan, but I think as the game goes on, you mentioned, Jerry, those black cards are going to provide a trump for Dylan.
Yeah, and we saw a pretty nice tweet from Dominic Harvey, SCG Open champion, yesterday, where he said, if I ever want to register Steel Leaf Champion again, please host an intervention.
I think that's smart on Dom's part.
Well, Dom is very smart, so things didn't go very well for him yesterday with Steel Leaf Champion. But Austin's doing a little bit better, and he is very much the aggressive deck in these pseudo mirrors because he has things like Steel Leaf Champion and even Carnage Tyrant against Vraska's Contempt, Ravenous Chupacabra, Hostage Taker, Find Finality, these cards that are very much, they thrive in the late game.
Yeah, if you're looking over on Cardboard Live, you see Austin only has 5 total spells in his deck, 5 non-creature spells. He's not interacting with his opponent's game plan in a lot of ways. He's just looking to be aggressive, and Hadana's Climb, a large part of that strategy. You see it sitting on the top of Austin's library here.
Yeah, Dylan is playing more of classic Golgari with just a light blue splash for Hydroid Crassus. No Hadana's Climb that we've seen a lot of players go to in this archetype.
And there we see the Steel Leaf Champion hitting the battlefield. Let's see if that can do some damage to Dylan's life total. Here we see a Jade Light Ranger. Going to get a little bigger, putting the Llanowar Elves in the graveyard and putting a Breeding Pool in Dylan's hand.
That's kind of wild. You'd think that maybe Dylan would want to keep the Llanowar Elves with the first Explorer so that Jade Light Ranger is 4 power and could potentially trade with the Steel Leaf Champion, but I guess he knows that Austin has Hadana's Climb coming up.
Right, he knows it's being played here and he knows it's going active. I mean, if Austin wants that Hadana's Climb to transform, he can do so right now, targeting the Wild Growth Walker, putting a 3rd counter on it, and getting the payoff for that powerful, powerful land.
Alternatively, you could just spread the love around a little bit.
I think that's an option as well. Yeah, I don't think it's determined that that's the only play that Austin has here. And indeed, we're going to see him do just that, putting a 2nd counter on Merfolk Branchwalker and making an aggressive attack here.
Yeah, so now that the Jade Light Ranger is only 3 power, Austin doesn't need to put a counter on the Steel Leaf Champion. It's not going to die in combat no matter what. So he pumps up the Merfolk Branchwalker, gets in for some damage, and leaves Hadana's Climb on the battlefield to still pump up his creatures, and whenever he wants to transform it, he basically can.
Looking like Dylan with a fistful of lands here. Going to deploy a Vivian Reed and take care of that Hadana's Climb, but Austin has the Spell Pierce, a crucial Spell Pierce. In fact, a game-winning Spell Pierce.
Yeah, the fun of.
Yeah, paying big dividends there, and Dylan's going to pick him up.
It looked kind of rocky there. It was like, oh man, if this Hadana Climb gets destroyed,
right,
it's possible that things are actually bad for Austin, but I guess Dylan was already at such a low life total. Maybe it wouldn't have mattered. Maybe he could have stuck through the last few points.
It doesn't matter. Austin had the Spell Pierce. We've seen that Spell Pierce do some work here in the feature match area. A good fun of. When the fun of stealing you games, that's exactly what you want out of a card like that. Let's take a look at our players' sideboards here. First, we'll start with Dylan Donegan on the left-hand side. We see he's packing 4 Duress, 2 Negate, 2 Disdainful Stroke, 2 Thrashing Brontodon, 1 Biogenic Ooze, an Assassin's Trophy, a Cast Down, Moment of Craving, and a Hostage Taker. Jerry, what do you like here for this matchup?
Man, 4 copies of Duress, 2 Negate, 2 Disdainful Stroke, 2 Thrashing Brontodon. That's a lot of Nexus hate.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, is not going to be a whole lot of help here. So things are looking kind of rough for Dylan, being down a game already and then still not having a whole lot in his sideboard. I mean, things like Cast Down, Hostage Taker, even the Assassin's Trophy, Biogenic Ooze, those are going to help him a little bit. Maybe Thrashing Brontodon if he wants to actually go after those Adonis climbs. But for the most part, Dylan's only making minor changes to his deck.
Yeah, they seem like these little incremental upgrades. It's not really a fundamental shift in strategy, just looking to get some upgrades with cards that might not be as effective in the matchup. Let's move over to Austin Collins here on Team or Climb. We go to his sideboard. We see 4 Lava Coil, 3 Disdainful Stroke, 2 Fight with Fire, 2 Negate, 2 Cinder Vines, 1 Crushing Canopy, and a River's Rebuke. Jerry, what do you like here from Austin?
It seems to me like River's Rebuke is supposed to be there for these green mirrors, but it's also kind of scary against a deck that has 3 copies of Find Finality, where if you get your entire battlefield destroyed, your River's Rebuke isn't going to be doing much. So you have to, there's like a very specific window where you actually get to use that card, but I do think that Austin realizes that he's the aggressor in the matchup, and he has some of the tools to play a long game, but realistically, he needs something like River's Rebuke or the Fight with Fires to actually close out the game. So those are probably where he's going to be turning to. And then Lava Coil looks pretty good at being able to tag Wild Growth Walkers, but that's about it.
Yeah, I think Austin has consented to playing a certain game against these Sultai decks, and I think River's Rebuke does fit with that game plan. I understand your concerns. If the game goes really long, he can find himself in a spot where it doesn't do anything, but Austin's in trouble if the game goes long anyway. He really needs to prioritize getting on the battlefield.
Yeah, and we saw Austin yesterday board in Disdainful Stroke in this matchup, probably as a hopes to like make sure that Finality does not resolve,
right.
And so he will likely be bringing in some copies of that too.
All right, well, if you're excited to play either of these decks, either Dylan Donegan Sultai Midrange or Austin Collins Team or Climb, you know the spot to do it for sure. It's SCG Game Night. Every week in January, giving out exclusive Perdukin tokens and sleeves. Look at those beautiful Perdukin sleeves. I know Jerry Thompson's running to pick them up
They're
as soon
so
as we finish
good.
casting today.
I know, I've been working, unfortunately, but I want them.
We'll get you a set. In February, we're going to switch over to Yeti Steady Go tokens and sleeve. Also adorable. I have nothing bad to say about the Yeti either. I don't want to overhype Perdukin. These are some nice-looking sleeves. And finally, when it comes to March, we're going to be giving out Veni Vidi Armadici tokens and sleeves. Look at that little pig in his suit of armor. Adorable.
It's an armadillo.
I guess it is an armadillo. Are armadillos related to pigs? They look very similar.
I don't know, man.
Either way, I love all animals.
I'm not a
Armadillos,
scientist.
Pigs, all thumbs up for me. If you want to learn more about Game Night, head over to go.starcitygames.com/game night.
So Dylan's deck is basically the talk of the tournament. It is by far the most popular archetype in day 2. And Austin, I think if he does well in this tournament, if he has found a Hydroid Crassus deck that is good in the mirror match, then his is going to be the deck to beat going forward. But it all depends on how Austin does.
Right. A lot of the future of the metagame hinging on this match, maybe, as people get their ideas taken away from here, heading into next week over at SCG Baltimore, what they want to do to take on this new menace of the format. Definitely Sultai Midrange is the deck to beat going into Baltimore.
Absolutely. I don't think it's particularly close either. Mono Red is doing well. There's a lot of it in day 2, but it seems like the Sultai decks, even with their somewhat painful mana base and a little bit on the slower end with Hydroid Crassus and stuff, like they've still found ways to actually manage that matchup.
Why don't we go ahead and take a look at Austin Collins' player slide. Obviously, Austin becoming a mainstay on the SCG Tour at only 16 years old. That's incredible stuff right there. Hailing from Kansas City, Missouri, he's making it to a lot of these opens now. You see he played 18 opens in 2018, along with 3 top 8s, 3 open top 8s, going with 3 invitational top 8s as well.
In a row.
In a row, exactly.
Back to back to back. It just goes to show how valuable the SCG Tour is for giving players like Austin a place where they can just show their skills and basically make themselves an up-and-comer. I mean, if the SCG Tour was around when I was 16, this is exactly what I would be doing. You know, I mean, stay in school, kids, and all that. Definitely do that. But, like, man, you get to play in 20 tournaments a year when you're 16 years old. It said at the bottom of the slide that he streams too. It would have been great for me.
For sure. And, 3 invitational top 8s, that's an accomplishment that people spend their whole careers trying to put together. Austin's done it at 16. What's the rest of his career going to look like? Man. Incredible stuff. So we see both players leading here with Incubation Druid, it looks like. Austin's was met with a cast down. Meanwhile, Dylan Donegan's board starting to get developed. He has a Wild Growth Walker as well as the Incubation Druid on his side. Let's see what Austin has here on turn 3.
That's the mana advantage really coming into play, though. And this is Dylan's only copy of Incubation Druid, which makes sense. He doesn't have any Hadana's Climbs. He has the 4 copies of Llanowar Elves, but there it is, doing its stuff.
2 spells in 1 turn, very big deal here in this matchup.
And then Incubation Druid, despite just being a mana acceleration card, is also just threatening to adapt and then pump out giant Hydroid Crassuses.
Austin looks like really having a bit of a think here on turn 3. I think I saw a Fight with Fire in hand, maybe considering directing that at the mana creature or even the Wild Growth Walker. There's probably merit there. I think we see a Lava Coil as well. So probably trying to prioritize a target, figure out what removal spell he may want to use here, or maybe he's looking to develop the board.
Yeah, I mean, what you do on this turn is going to influence what you do on each subsequent turn, where, do you play a slower game? Do you just try and develop your own battlefield and hope to turn the corner at some point? And Austin just goes with the slow the game down plan.
Absolutely, and now you have to wonder, did he choose the right target? Because we see Vivian Reed hit the battlefield, and that's going to generate huge advantages for Dylan as this game goes on. Taking a look at the 4 cards from the top of Vivian Reed right now, we see he already has Hydroid Crassus in hand, Incubation Druid on the battlefield. As we mentioned, Austin needs to get on board early, quick, needs to play a fast game. It's starting to look like that may not happen in this game.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I mean, there's no direct way for Austin to remove a Vivian Reed. I think Hadana's Climb that he just explored into is certainly a powerful option that could eventually remove the Vivian, but it's a ways off too.
Yeah, there's a lot of setup required before Hadana's Climb has a meaningful impact on this game, and you can see Austin is contemplating exactly that. He's saying, can I afford to let this Hadana's Climb come online? Is that going to be my win condition? Austin thinks yes. He's going to leave it on top.
Leaves it on top and misses a land drop. So
yeah,
potentially
huge cost there.
Could have used a land off that Jade Light Ranger for sure. But you see Dylan, pace of play, speeding up. He knows he's in full control, like he's super ahead. Working that Vivian. Also has the Crassus still in his hand if he wants to reload.
Yeah, a lot of options available to Dylan here. Considering the 4 cards he revealed from Vivian, what does he want to add to his hand? Going to take a look at Hadana's Climb.
He read it last game. He's going to read it this game
again.
too.
It's powerful, Dylan.
You got to make sure. There's no shame in this.
Yeah.
You have to know what you're up against.
I think sometimes viewers are a little surprised to see such talented players like Dylan taking the time to read a format staple like Hadana's Climb. Dylan knows what the card does. Basically, he just wants to confirm the exact details. There's no room for mistakes, no room for error. He needs to know exactly what Wing Temple of Orazka can do once it transforms. Just dotting the I's, crossing the T's, making sure no mistakes are made.
Right, and there's no reason to not just be sure.
Right.
It's like, is it 4 mana in tap? Is it 3 mana in tap? I don't really remember the actual specifics. I guess it is kind of funny where you see a lot of the Sultai decks playing Hadana's Climb themselves, so maybe this tips off Austin a little bit as to the contents of Dylan's deck. So there is that.
Right. One more look for Dylan there at the transform side of Hadana's Climb.
It's like, wait, you just get to transform it right away and it's untapped? And
I know, Dylan. It seems unfair. I agree with you. But here we see another unfair card. Vivian ticking up to 8, finding Carnage Tyrant, perhaps, Jade Light Ranger with Wild Growth Walker on the battlefield. A bevy of options here for Dylan. We see a Jade Light Ranger already in hand. He's not going to lack for plays here.
Yeah, this is the situation that we're kind of alluding to where Hadana's Climb's a little far off. Austin can potentially use it in combination with the Jade Light Ranger to finish off Vivian next turn, but he's just going to be so far behind.
And it looks like Dylan chose the card, which will let him develop his battlefield to the fullest. We see Hostage Taker on top of the deck. It seems like a good one, and Dylan agrees. He's going to leave it there, and I think we're going to see a follow-up Jade Light Ranger possibly to get even more board presence. Let's see. We see an untapped Drowned Catacomb, and there is the Jade Light Ranger. Wild Growth Walker soaring to 5 counters. Dylan Donegan, 33 life. Very safe life total with a nice play coming up next turn. Taking all the dice over in our feature match area.
Just some confusion over what cards actually entered the battlefield this turn, what explored, how many times did they explore. Gets confusing.
Dylan's playing so many spells now, it's hard to keep track of them. So we see an attack here from the Wild Growth Walker, rumbling in for 6 points of damage. Austin Collins going to fall to 14. And, I mean, this is the turn where something has to happen for Austin, and it has to be something dramatic, right?
Right, and I don't think Dylan really cares about anything that Austin can potentially do this turn.
River's Rebuke? Restart the game here?
I mean, it would restart the game, but Dylan's still at 33. Austin doesn't have much of a board presence. And
yeah, Austin agrees, it looks like. He's going to go ahead and scoop up his cards. Get ready for game 3. So we see some of the problem where Austin is not able to generate that immediate battlefield presence. He's just got to force the action, got to start his clock nice and early, and wasn't able to do so in that game, particularly because Dylan was able to 2-spell in an early turn. Let's take another look at the sideboards, just see if we want to change anything up. We won't do a full read here. Jerry, anything you want to reconsider after having seen that game? Anything you think is extra important? Let's go to Austin's side. You know, he was kind of run over in that match. Does that make you reconsider your position on any of the cards here?
I don't know. I mean, I do think that having some amount of interaction is important to be able to remove the important threats. Hostage Taker is another one that Austin may actually want spot removal for. And other than that, it's not like you're going to lose to Wild Growth Walker straight up or necessarily Incubation Druid straight up, but you might want it just to slow them down and keep tempo and be able to even remove a blocker so that you can attack their Vivian Reeds and whatnot. So I feel like some of the creatures are expendable. You don't necessarily need your deck to be all threats.
What do you think about play-draw differences? Any play-draw differences here?
So on the play, I generally like to be less reactive in general, because you want to be able to capitalize the fact that you're on the play. You want to be able to like curve out with threats. And if your turn 2 is go and you just have a bunch of like Disdainful Strokes and Lava Coils in your hand, you're not really capitalizing on anything. And Austin's deck definitely needs to be the aggressor in the matchup. So I would not board in all the Lava Coils, all the Disdainful Strokes, all the Fight with Fires, but some mix of them I would definitely like to have, but probably in smaller numbers on the play than on the draw.
Right, that makes sense. Why don't we go ahead and take a look at Dylan Donegan's accomplishments here on the SCG Tour. Dylan, also a young man, 21 years old, hailing from Cary, North Carolina. We see he played 14 Opens in 2018, top 8 at 5 of them. That's a pretty incredible conversion percentage there. Dylan also packing 2 open wins under his belt, 14 top 8s all time, invitational top 8, of course, invitational champion, and the youngest invitational champion in SCG Tour history.
I wonder who is the youngest before Dylan.
I don't know. That's a good question. Dylan was about 17 when he won, right?
Yeah.
Very young, and he's only gotten better in the 4 years since. Become a fixture on the SCG Tour, certainly plays on all the pro levels at this point. He's had his chance at the highest levels of the game and has succeeded at all of them.
Yeah, he is definitely one of the scariest opponents because he's young now still, but even when he was 15, 16, even 17 when he won his Invitational, he was already very talented.
Right.
And since then, he's been around for as long as some of the other grinders who are much older than him, So like Austin, both of these two are just going to have incredible careers ahead of them.
Sometimes, as an old dinosaur like myself, I look at how accomplished these players are, how good they are, and it's kind of intimidating, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy how far along they are in their careers, given how little Magic they've actually played. Someone like me who's been playing Magic for 20 years. And I look at what Austin has been able to accomplish in so few years. It's absolutely jaw-dropping.
Did you ever play 20 opens in 1 year, though?
I did not. That is true. But regardless, I think that doesn't take away from what Austin and Dylan have accomplished in the slightest.
No, of course not. I'm just saying that they are applying themselves.
Right. They are committed. They are focused on succeeding on the SCG Tour, and they're reaping the benefits of doing so.
You were doing things like going to law school.
That is true. That is true. Maybe I should have been playing SCG Tours instead, and I would have a cool player's slide. I kind of regret some of my decisions.
Well, you have a commentator slide, so...
Oh, that's true.
That's not bad.
And I have that squirrel token. I kind of bested the system,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
These players had to go through the Invitational to get their tokens.
Andrew Jessup had to win an Invitational to get his token.
Right. I just got to show up here and say some words, and
yeah.
I somehow end up with a squirrel token. Pretty easy game. Looks like the players are ready to draw some opening hands here.
I wonder if Dylan is worried about potentially having to give up the title of youngest invitational champion, because Austin, having top-8'd 3 in a row at 16, it's only a matter of time before it's Austin, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, I guess his window's closing, though. He's got to do this soon.
Oh, because Dylan was 17.
Right. He's going to be older than 17 soon. So maybe this is the year where he can finally take that title away from Dylan Donegan.
Ooh, and there are fewer invitationals. All right, now I think it might be Austin who's sweating it.
Yeah. Yes, the pressure's finally mounting on Austin to be the youngest invitational champion of all time.
He's on a timer.
Maybe Austin's above that. Maybe Austin doesn't care. He's just like, I'm here to play Magic. I'm going to play my best game. I'm going to let the accomplishments fall where they may.
Yeah, I've been very impressed by both of these players' attitudes, where it's just like, you know, luck is a thing. Sometimes I get unlucky, but like definitely could have made better choices. And they're always thinking about the process and how to get better and everything. So,
Jerry, when you were 16,
no,
did you
no
have that attitude about Magic the Gathering?
No, or life at all. It was just, oh man, I'm so unlucky. I'm just the victim in every scenario, you know. And everything's out of my control, right? Now it's just like, oh yeah, I realize that everything is within my control to most extents.
Right. That's a maturity speaking, and these players at their young ages are already showing great maturity when it comes to understanding basically the profession that they've chosen. They understand the variance, they understand what they signed up for, and they accept it. So it looks like Dylan took a mulligan here. He's going to go ahead and look at his 6-card hand. That's got to be good news for Austin, especially taking the play here, which I'm very sure that's where Austin wants to be in this matchup.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Sultai deck just mulligans pretty well, too.
It does. Hydroid Crassus has a lot to do with that. If you can just find your mana, Jade Light Ranger, Merfolk Branchwalker, so on and so forth, eventually playing a large Hydroid Crassus is going to erase that early game 1 or 2 card deficit.
All you have to do in the meantime is stay alive.
Correct. Here we see Austin leading on Incubation Druid once more, looking to get that mana advantage that we've identified as an important part of this matchup. Looks like Dylan really having to think over his 2-drop here. It's going to be Wild Growth Walker trying to establish some safety on his side of the board, gain some life. Austin with another nice play in Jade Light Ranger, flipping over Lava Coil.
Well, this is the situation, right? You have a Lava Coil facing a Wild Growth Walker, but does Austin need some lands?
It looks like Austin has lands in hand, but he chose to put the Lava Coil into the graveyard anyway. Maybe fearing Jade Light Ranger on this turn, invalidating the Lava Coil. Here we see only a Merfolk Branchwalker.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. I think with Dylan kind of tanking last turn, you could probably figure out that he had a Merfolk Branchwalker, right? He was trying to decide which one to play.
See now a Jade Light Ranger on top of Dylan's library, which means that Wild Growth Walker is going to start getting larger. Let's see if that becomes a problem and if Austin made the right decision with that Lava Coil as this game goes on. Austin going to go ahead, untap, take a draw. Going to have access to 5 mana this turn. We'll see if he has a powerful play to make.
Yeah. Pace of the game is basically going to be dictated by this turn because Austin has River's Rebuke in hand. So if he's able to assemble a battlefield presence, the Rebuke is going to be backbreaking. If you get to cast River's Rebuke and you have something like a 2 or 3 turn clock on the battlefield, then it's almost certainly lights out. But if his turn is really anemic, then the River's Rebuke is going to be very poor.
Pass. Pass from Austin.
Pass is not necessarily the worst thing because he could be setting up for a big Incubation Druid turn.
Okay.
It could, so say Austin had a 3 mana card, it might be more beneficial to just adapt the Incubation Druid this turn, next turn, play a couple spells, and then Rebuke on the following turn rather than just not use his mana effectively this turn. So
yeah, that makes sense to me. Looking to spend as much mana as possible. Often that's the best strategy in a vacuum. Not always true, but here it seems to be the approach Austin is taking.
If you're Dylan, though, it's like your opponent has 5 mana. They just put a Lava Coil in the graveyard off and explore. What are they up to?
Right. Got to be suspicious. And here we see just a cast down right in the main phase. Not trying to bait Austin to spend some mana there, although in his deck it's probably unlikely he has a lot to spend it on other than the Incubation Druid. We certainly know very spell light for Austin Collins.
Yeah, this could also just be a scenario where you get to pass the turn with the instant speed effect of activating Incubation Druid, but it also can just disguise a counterspell really well.
Sure. Looks like Jade Light Ranger and Merfolk Branchwalker are going to trade here. Austin going to take a little bit of damage from that Wild Growth Walker, falling down to 16. Takes the turn back. No board presence anymore, Jerry. Board completely clean, and that completely invalidates that River's Rebuke plan in a lot of ways. He's going to have to reestablish a board very quickly if he's going to leverage that card.
Yeah, now the Rebuke is going to be live much later, but in the short term, it's effectively a dead card. You're not going to be able to get a whole lot of use out of it, so there's a world in which you would consider just not trading, but I think Austin feels like that's not going to be a good enough game plan either. So just trade, prolong the game.
Here we see Merfolk Branchwalker coming into play, revealing Disdainful Stroke. Disdainful Stroke's going to go to the graveyard. Austin not interested in the card. Does he have a follow-up to this Branchwalker?
It's kind of awkward. Dylan had not yet seen Disdainful Stroke. I think he had seen a Spell Pierce, so it's pretty likely that there's some amount of interaction there.
Right.
But to keep that on top after an Explore would be ballsy.
Yeah. Giving up a lot of information. Here we see Fight with Fire take care of Dylan's Wild Growth Walker. Dylan has a follow-up in the form of Jade Light Ranger. Going to add a couple lands to his hand. Not the worst scenario when Dylan has, I believe, a Hydroid Crassus in hand. He's looking to cast a big one in future turns. Pretty happy to be adding to his battlefield additional lands.
Yeah, now you just need the Wayward Swordtooth. Make everything come together.
You love Wayward Swordtooth. You can't wait to put these two cards together.
Oh, yeah. I have a problem.
I've been there, man. Sometimes a card just tickles your fancy in a certain way. You can't avoid building decks around it. You're waking up in the middle of the night with more Wayward Swordtooth ideas. I've seen it happen many times.
From looking in the mirror, no doubt.
Oh, yeah. See any gate-based card, for an example.
Yeah.
So Dylan just playing a land here, passing the turn over to Austin. See a Disdainful Stroke already in hand for Austin. It looks like Disdainful Stroke, River's Rebuke, and maybe 2 lands?
Not ideal.
No, that's going to be tough for Austin to convert, especially because Dylan's going to start doing some Crassus stuff soon, and we know one Crassus leads to the next.
They always bring friends.
Yeah.
It's like a whole school of Crassuses.
That's the tough thing about a Crassus, right? You're invited to a party. Next thing you know, there's 10 Crassus walking in the door. They're oozing all over your furniture. You have tentacles everywhere.
At least they're gaining you a bunch of life, though.
That's true.
Drawing you some cards. They're not bad party guests.
Austin Collins just drew a second Disdainful Stroke. He is completely reactive in hand now. And if you've read Hydroid Crassus, it's a cast trigger.
It is.
Now, there's value in keeping that body off the battlefield, no doubt, 100%. But when you're casting a Hydroid Crassus for what looks like it's going to be an X of probably, it'll be 6 when Dylan finally pulls the trigger, I bet. That's going to generate a lot of value. And here we see a Jade Light Ranger revealing a Carnage Tyrant. Maybe that's what Austin was looking for to start setting up this River's Rebuke plan.
Yeah, that's good. And in the meantime, they keep trading chip shots. And the Disdainful Strokes are really good against the Vivian side of Dylan's deck, the finalities, but certainly not the end-all, be-all because of Hydroid Crassus.
Right.
How you fight these decks basically has to change.
I think so. And I think Austin has a good blueprint. I think the early aggression is one way you can look to punch these decks. Just he was only able to really leverage that plan in game 1 thus far, and that could be a pronounced weakness. I think post-sideboard, Sultai has a lot of tools. It can adapt in a lot of ways. We mentioned they're mostly upgrades of spells, but those upgrades matter. If you're able to stem the Temur Climb's tempo a little bit, that can really pay big dividends as you get to this point of the game.
Yeah, realistically, that is what it comes down to. It's all a bunch of jockeying for position and posturing, and then eventually both players start playing Crassus, and who is both favored to get to that scenario and who's favored to excel in that scenario once it gets there. And I think Sultai just kind of wins on both axes.
So look at this play. Dylan Donegan with essentially a chump attack, hoping that Austin would just eat the Jadelight Ranger so he could follow up with Find, getting back Wild Growth Walker, and redeploying that same Jadelight Ranger, bringing his life total up to a healthy 21 points and putting a 3/5 Wild Growth Walker on the battlefield.
Yeah, so the chip shots make a lot of sense now, where before it's just like, why would Dylan be willing to trade damage? I mean, he obviously has to end the game before Austin starts kicking Fight with Fires or transforming Hadana's Climb or whatever. But the fact that he was then able to just leverage that into, I'll just gain 6 life. Now I'm back at 20, and I actually dealt you some meaningful damage.
Right.
Very heads-up play.
Here we see another Wild Growth Walker hitting the battlefield. I'm about 100% sure that Dylan has Crassus in hand, right? Is that the gold card we see, or have I misread his hand?
I know he has an Assassin's Trophy.
Okay, so maybe it's possible he doesn't have a Crassus then, because I think the other card is Forest. So maybe we've misread his positioning in this game, and he's looking for that first Crassus to come off the deck. But in the meantime, I think his board presence looks stable, and I also think that even post-Rivers Rebuke, he's going to be able to dump a bunch on the table very quickly and rebuild. Obviously, there's going to be a large hit coming if any Rivers Rebuke does get cast.
Large hit, but then you look at Wild Growth Walker, Jadelight Ranger.
You recouped a lot of life. 12 to be specific.
That's almost all of it.
Yeah.
You're down 2, basically.
And I don't think that's what Austin's trying to set up with this big, potentially game-ending play, is having his opponent down 2 life at the end of it.
No, that you can't really leverage that any which way. So if Austin were in trouble, he could potentially pull that trigger, but I think he's still fine playing the waiting game because he also has Hydroid Crassus that he can draw into. So
very true. Yeah, we've kind of ignored that angle. We mentioned Austin is certainly the weaker long game deck, but he has his own Crassuses, and that will reload him, giving him some new options potentially.
Kind of weird to see Austin in the tank for a minute or so and then just land pass. Got to be wondering what he's up to.
Right.
And Rivers Rebuke is a card that we have not seen in a while.
Right. I wonder if Dylan has the read right now. Looks like we're content to play some draw go on both sides at a rapid pace. Nobody even hiding anymore. Yep, I'm drawing land, just so you know. Here we see a non-land card in Merfolk Branchwalker. Going to put a breeding pool into Dylan's hand, actually the battlefield. A lot of mana on both sides right now. A lot of mana. These are going to be some silly Crassus. Crassuses.
I've decided. I'm putting my foot down, man.
I'm going to keep calling it Crassi. I'm actually just going to oscillate between the two, completely at random.
I'm sure our viewers appreciate that.
Right. We already established viewers don't care about pronunciation, things like consistency.
I might disagree with you.
So it looks like Dylan's lining up a play here for the first time in a while. Vraska's Contempt on the Jadelight Ranger, looking to stem some of that board presence, pad the life total a little bit. We know Austin's sitting on some disdainful strokes. Don't think this Vraska's Contempt is going to merit a response from Austin, but it seems like he's thinking about it.
Well, he's at 12, would only then have 2 blockers. You don't know if Dylan can then remove the Merfolk Branchwalker as well, so it is kind of tough.
And here we see Assassin's Trophy on Merfolk Branchwalker. Austin has to be sweating a little bit now.
Like, there's a reason that Dylan just kind of out of nowhere is going to main phase Vraska's Contempt one of your creatures.
Yeah. Carnage Tyrant going to eat the larger of the Wild Growth Walkers. Still getting in there for what looks like 4, 6, 7 damage, dropping Austin Collins to 5, and only a Llanowar Elf off the top of Austin's deck.
Which conveniently sets Dylan up for lethal. because if he's able to remove whatever creature Austin plays,
Right.
he gets the Alpha Strike for the win.
Austin had the fear, felt like something was up. Time to deploy that River's Rebuke. Get in there for 7 damage. Dylan falling to a still extremely healthy 22.
Yeah, Dylan is doing just fine. And that's the problem with River's Rebuke. Sometimes it's just very anemic.
Right.
Accomplishes very, very little.
Oh, and a hostage taker on top for Dylan. He's going to choose instead to put it in the graveyard. Feeling like he has enough answers right now.
You may have enough removal, and I do think that Dylan is in a good spot to where even if Austin draws a Hydroid Crassus, he might still be fine.
Right.
But Hostage Taker is one of the best answers to that card.
It is. Yeah, Dylan's hand just stocked with removal, I think. I see Assassin's Trophy.
Trophies for days.
And he has completely rebuilt from the River's Rebuke.
Well, here comes the Crassus.
All right, we got a big one. This might be our biggest Crassus yet.
Looks like Austin is settling for 10 and then maybe trying to play some follow-up.
Keeping up mana for that Disdainful Stroke, possibly.
Crassus for 10 would put Austin up to 10 life.
Full hand.
Would have 3 blockers. And would be looking at 3 damage, assuming Dylan has nothing.
But we know Dylan has something.
Yeah, if his non-Carnage Tyrant creatures are removed,
I think he still has lethal, right?
then Dylan has lethal for sure.
Right.
Still has 11 damage.
You think Dylan's going to go for it here? Does Dylan sense the weakness?
Oh, yeah. He's been sensing weakness for the last few turns.
Right.
Once he had enough removal spells, it actually did the math. He was like, oh, yeah, I can just make 2 attacks. And those 2 attacks were only viable because Dylan elected to trade hits in the early game.
Correct. Looks like Austin did find another Crassus, another Hadana's Climb. These cards may not matter. I just don't think he's going to get another chance to deploy anything unless he plays something right now.
It was really just 2 turns too late for Austin.
Okay, here's a Merfolk Branchwalker. Is that enough to keep him alive? Austin going to pass the turn over to Dylan Donegan. Dylan's taking the draw here. Has another Jade Light Ranger. Wild Growth Walker gets even bigger, and guess what? That Carnage Tyrant can't even block the Wild Growth Walker effectively anymore. Vraska's Contempt on top. What does Dylan have for the rest of the turn? Assassin's Trophy, targeting Hydroid Crassus. We're lining up some attacks.
Dylan thinking about whether or not he wants to fire off this last Assassin's Trophy, or whether these attacks are good enough and maybe he should just save the removal spell in case he needs it for something more important.
And it looks like that's where he's fallen. Going to have a chump block on the Wild Growth Walker from a Llanowar Elf. Carnage Tyrant looking to pick off Jade Light Ranger. Dylan's sitting at a paltry 40 life right now.
Wild Growth Walker is stupid.
It's a silly card, very powerful. Slept on for a very long time as well, it's worth noting. It was viewed as kind of a cute card, but would only make the rarest of sideboard appearances.
It's like, oh, limited build around, but for the most part, we have better ways to fight these red decks, and now it's just like, whatever, it's just a good card. We'll just play it main deck.
Yep. Yeah, when you have Merfolk Branchwalker and Jade Light Ranger in your deck, it feels closer to Tarmogoyf more often than not. So here we go, Austin with all of the mana in the world. The world is his oyster. Can he put together something to stay alive and eventually turn the tide of battle? Here's a Hadana's Climb.
Is this going to accomplish anything?
Does not make the Carnage Tyrant large enough to block Wild Growth Walker and survive. That's a huge problem that Austin needs to find outs to. And as we talked about, not a lot of outs in Austin's deck. Here's where those black spells really matter, Jerry.
Yeah. It is the River's Rebukes and the Fight with Fires of the world that are trying to make it so Wild Growth Walker does not matter very much. But River's Rebuke also doesn't really do a whole lot against it given enough mana because you just replay out everything, you explore again, so you're still incentivized to kill off the explore creatures too so they can't rebuild.
Right.
You're putting yourself in kind of an awkward situation.
It's got a very powerful effect in a very limited window, essentially. You have to find exactly the right spot. So we see Dylan checking out the Oracle text of Adana's Climb. That's what that phone is doing in Dylan's hand right now. Really, really concerned about that card. He's got a lot of questions.
He just needs to know everything. It's like, okay, this is a situation that might come up. How is this going to work?
I do think that copy may be a foreign copy of Adana's Climb that's currently on the battlefield.
Every language is foreign to someone.
That's true. Oh, that is true. When did you become such a deep philosopher? Dropping these jewels of wisdom on our listeners today.
Never, man. I just make it up.
I think that's part of what philosophy is. Now I have all the philosophy majors absolutely outraged with me. So here we have removal spell, and that is going to do it. Austin Collins not able to find enough to stabilize. Dylan Donegan looking very impressive with the Sultai mid-range deck. Like we said, Austin just needed to do more in the early game.